He always said, "It's not that I forget, I just can't remember."
It's hard. It hurts you to the core.
I feel like Alzheimer's is more of just a thief. It just steals people's lives and brains and personality.
She tells me that we first met, and I barely remember this, when I was a freshman in college and she was a junior in high school, maybe a senior. And she'd gone to a church conference and I was there too, and she met me. And she thought, "Oh, this interesting guy." Ann and I were at a YWCA retreat at a lakeside out in Minnesota, and we were dating at the time. And somebody came along and took the photo of the two of us, and I think it's really a charming photo.
We met in college. Do I remember how we met? Do you remember how we met?
Yes.
Huh?
Yes, I'm waiting for you.
Well, I'm going to get it wrong.
Oh, he was very active in the community and read a lot and was interested in liberal activities, ACLU and Southern poverty law. What else can I say? Had a great sense of humor and always an avid reader, which of course he couldn't do after he had Alzheimer's. I can't compare it to anything else. He was on 2 medications which were supposed to slow it down. But I would say it progressed fairly fast by the time we got to Kendall, which was 2003. He stayed here with me in the cottage till about 6-7 months before he passed away. And then I couldn't handle it anymore.
The disease causes parts of the brain to die. And these parts of the brain die either because the molecules that are inside them get all tangled and then they can't signal correctly, or they die because they accumulate these proteins on the outside that are toxic and they kill the cells. And then as the brain starts to die, we lose the ability to remember things, to make reasonable decisions, to understand what's going on. When people have Alzheimer's, one of the brain cells that dies early on is cells that are involved in knowing how to get from one place to another. So we call them the navigation cells. So they basically this is the whole thing with people getting lost. But that doesn't stop them from wanting to go to a certain place. It just means they're likely to get lost on the way there or on the way back.
He was supposed to just drive on the campus here, and so I sort of knew where he was. And I would go up and drive around to see if the car was there, and one day it was not. And I was very, very concerned. And he came back about an hour later. This is his sense of humor again. And I said, Charles, where were you? And he said, well, I was looking for cheap gas. And he was on the way to Syracuse.
Because people with Alzheimer's are losing their cognitive function, sometimes they lose the ability to make what we would think of as rational decisions, and they make very impulsive choices, like, I'm going to get in the car and go wherever. Alzheimer's is pretty indiscriminate in who it attacks, if you will. It is certainly a disease we see more now because with medicine, people are living longer, and the risk of developing Alzheimer's increases as you get older. So there are certainly cases where it can happen to people who are very young, but most of the cases of Alzheimer's we see now are the people who are living well into their 80s. So my father was probably in his late 70s when we first started to notice signs that he was having issues with memory and things. The last year of his life, he lost a lot of his dignity. You know, when Alzheimer's patients are in the final stages, they lose control of their bodily functions, they kind of regress. They have to wear diapers, they have to have someone take care of them all the time. And this was a man who was so brilliant and so smart, and his patients loved him and adored him. And, you know, he was now more like a toddler, and it was really hard watching that because he was kind of a shell of the person I knew. He just wasn't my dad anymore.
Here's a person who has been an independent individual all of her life, a teacher who told other people, her students, what to do, and to come in this situation where people are telling her what to do must be very, very difficult. She resents having to follow directions by people all the time. If she is awakened in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, for example, she gives the aides a hard time.
Some days he didn't want to get dressed at all. I call that a bad day.
My dad was always a big storyteller, always told stories, and there's no question that he would often tell the same stories months apart, but as his disease progressed, the stories got closer together in time to the point where they would almost enter a loop. He'd tell a story, and then he would tell the story again. And my parents were over for dinner one day, and I looked over, and my two kids, who were fairly young, were kind of giggling and nudging each other, and under the table, they were using their fingers to count the number of times he was telling this particular story, and each time he'd start again, their fingers would increase by one, and they thought it was all highly amusing that he was telling the same thing over and over again.
Has it ever frustrated me, Jean? No, not yet. How has it been? Well, so far I really haven't noticed it too much, or at all. So as the years go by, I don't know what's going to happen. We'll just have to, it's another step we have to take.
Basically, inside the cell, there's like a network, a scaffold of proteins that holds it all together and creates highways for things to travel. And tau kind of keeps all the roads straight. And in Alzheimer's, tau starts to twist and tangle. And so it's kind of like if you can imagine if someone took the thruway and then all of a sudden twisted it all up, you couldn't travel anymore. And so in a cell where that happens, it can no longer communicate from one end to the other. And so that can disrupt it. And then the other protein that's so involved is something called amyloid beta, which is a protein that's normally secreted by cells, but there are certain forms of it that are toxic, and they clump together, and the body can't get rid of them, and they just form these big giant clumps of proteins and other basically trash outside the cells that are toxic, and these clumps can actually poison the cells they're in contact with. The most cruel thing about Alzheimer's is that the person loses themselves. They're no longer that person that they've always been. They lose their identity, they lose everything about them that made them them is stolen by this disease.
When he passed away, how did you feel?
I won't say relieved, but close to that, because it was not quality of life for either of us.
Um, well, you live with it. It might be something that hurts for a few while it's going on, but you have to step back and say, no, this is a new life.
After Charles passed away, people would say, oh, I feel so sorry for your loss. Well, of course I did too, but I lost him before he died. That's the sad part about Alzheimer's.